Hey everyone, this is a video of how I actually failed to replicate this data pipeline. So I wanted to follow this an hour-long tutorial, and as you can see, it has about 4 components. So basically here, what you do is you produce 10 fake cities alongside with the temperatures. These temperatures are sent every 10 seconds to a Kafka, and Kafka is sending those values to Flink job. Flink job basically does aggregation. It is a Java code that does aggregation of averages and sends it to Postgres. Now, this is a video, again, like I said, of how I actually failed to replicate this entire thing. I could not finish it, but nonetheless I learned a lot, so I'm going to tell you what I actually learned. So the first thing that you probably should notice if you try to follow this tutorial is that it is using macOS. It's using a macOS. It's using a macOS. Yeah, as you can see, it has 3 dots, right? It's using macOS, and because of that, I did not pay attention to the actual GitHub repo here. This is the GitHub repo, right? So I basically just git cloned it and decided to docker compose -d, and I was hoping that things gonna work quickly. It did not. Apparently it failed first because I was running it inside my Kali Linux. So I was running Kali Linux in a VirtualBox, and as you know, Kali Linux is a Linux environment, and it actually it has its own sort of network connectivity that you cannot simply refer to it as just Docker macOS. So let me actually show you. So Flink job is basically Flink job is Java code. Postgres database is simple. Kafka is simple, and Python is simple. Everything here works except the problem with Flink. Flink itself was written in Java code. So if I want to properly deploy it, what you have to do is you have to first build a jar file out of Java using Maven. Maven is a build and compile tool. This Flink is not running as a standalone cluster, so you actually basically run just a small jar job. And if you're running a small jar job, as you can see here, it's basically replicated in the Docker file. In Docker file, you're not starting an entire standalone cluster. You are starting just this little thing, right? You are basically copying this jar file, Flink processor jar. Flink processor jar is all of the code in Java source code that is compiled into a .jar file. So you're running it as a simple consume and produce to a Postgres sort of thing, right? It's not a standalone cluster. Because of this, I did not know, and I still don't know, how to actually properly see what happens inside Flink and why it fails. Usually, if you deploy Flink, if it is a cluster, you have a web UI. And a web UI allows you to basically see the status of a job, if it fails or not. But I did not learn this until way too late, until I spent like 4 days. It's been about 4 days after my full-time job that I've been trying to replicate it. And I actually ask it like a lot in my ChatGPT. I have like a super long ChatGPT here, right? Yeah, it's super long. It's super long here. So again, like I said, the problem was that I was running this tutorial. It runs on macOS, and I was running it inside the VirtualBox, inside Kali Linux. So I had to I had to basically just detect this error way too late. So here, if you actually make any changes, let's say to this Java source code, right? This is the main Java. So what it does here is it basically, let me show you. Yeah, this particular line. This line is all the problem. So as you can see, it's saying Docker for macOS host internal. Because I did not notice it until too late, it basically tries to connect to a Postgres here. It's trying to Postgres through this for macOS host internal, and it wasn't working, obviously. So I spent about 2 days trying to figure out why it's not working. Eventually, I figured this out, and as you can see, it's not failing. All of the 5 containers, all of the 4 containers are actually up. But yeah, all of the 4 containers are actually up, but they're not really working. Basically, the problem here is that I still cannot write from Flink to Postgres. Postgres has a table, but it's empty. Python continuously produces cities and temperatures, but Flink fails to actually resolve to a Postgres database. So this line was failing. So it's trying to create a JDBC connection. and this line was basically pain in the ass for me, right? All of this debugging. Now on top of this, let's say you actually let's say you found the problem with your Docker file, right? Here you found something and you changed the Docker file. If you forget that you actually have to recompile the jar file, if you forget about this thing, everything you had in the Java source code, if you did not change it, that problem with the actual main Java, that problem with Docker, that problem with Mac OS host internal, if you did not change this line and if you were just tinkering and playing around with your Docker file, it's not gonna do shit, right? It's not gonna propagate the changes. See what I'm saying? My problem was that I spent another 3 days trying to catch a bug without actually realizing that I have to rebuild my Maven like this. I have to do something like Maven clean package, right? And it will basically take all of that Java source code and actually do something, right? And it will recompile it. It will recompile it into jar file. So the deployment, if you make any changes, you have to basically make sure that these changes are properly deployed. If you make any changes to Java source code, you need to also ensure that you rebuild the jar file, that you build a new jar file. And because I was doing everything manually, I was forgetting to introduce those changes into my jar. I was just changing the Docker file. And this was the main problem. Now, after I've done successfully this two-step process, you recompile your jar file with Maven, and then you rebuild your Docker file with Docker. I was basically doing Docker Compose up. And as you can see, my Docker Compose app is running. If I do Docker Compose PS, you will see that I have all 5 of them running, right? Yeah, all of them are running. Initially, my Flink processor was failing because it could not even come up. So I spent 2 days trying to figure out why Flink processor was not even coming up. My Flink processor was failing because it could not resolve to this Docker macOS host internal, right? This thing. Also, don't forget the ports. So far I actually failed to reproduce this tutorial and it's not working yet for me. It's been pain in the ass, honestly. But I learned so much. I learned that there is actually flink conf file. There is a configuration file for Flink. There is many different ways to deploy Flink as a standalone job, standalone cluster, and depending on how you actually do this, you have to make sure that you can see what happens inside. Right now I have all these containers up and running, but I cannot even curl. I cannot even curl into my web UI, right? Because web UI is not accessible. It's not even up. Because I'm running Flink, again, like I said, I'm running Flink as a standalone job, not a cluster. It's just a small job, and it's not really properly creating a web UI for me. So yeah, this is a short lesson of what I learned by not implementing this tutorial, right? Again, pay attention to the host platform of the tutorial. Pay attention to all of these little nitty-gritty details. Never forget about things like this, and never forget about the deployment process, because here, if you make changes, if you make changes to the source code, it's a 2-step process. You have to recompile this Java code again using Maven, and then you have to wrap it up in Docker container again, right? So you have to rebuild Docker. So it's a 2-step process actually. Anyways, this is what I actually wanted to share with you guys. This is a lesson of how I did not implement this one.